While my cousins eagerly calculated future millions in profits, and my brother was already anticipating signing documents for a luxurious seaside mansion, I stood humbly aside, holding a worn-out briefcase whose appearance evoked associations with a forgotten junkyard rather than valuable property. Everyone around couldn't help but laugh. My own mother, trying to speak as quietly as possible so as not to attract undue attention, whispered to my aunt that Uncle Vernon must have completely lost his mind before he passed away. However, as soon as I managed to discover a secret compartment in that old briefcase and saw its contents, I immediately realized that I was the only heir destined to understand the true reason why Vernon Holbrook's fortune was valued at a staggering $22 million. On that memorable day, as we gathered in the attorney's office, the air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and bitter disappointment. Mr. Harrison had just finished reading Uncle Vernon's will, and my family was visibly agitated by the prospect of receiving their inheritance. My brother Randall was already on the phone with a real estate agent, discussing the most lucrative investment options for luxury properties in Miami. My cousin Dwayne was excitedly calculating how many new Ferraris he could add to his already impressive collection. Even my teenage daughter Bethany seemed more interested in texting her friends about her future college trust fund. And there I was, Mitchell Holbrook, a 34-year-old high school history teacher, holding this ill-fated briefcase that looked as if it had survived both world wars and been hopelessly lost in time. Its leather was cracked, resembling parched earth, and ominous green mold spread across one corner. The brass clasps were so tarnished they appeared almost black, and the odor emanating from it made everyone involuntarily recoil when I tried to pick it up. "Is this for real?" Dwayne exclaimed, not even attempting to conceal his contemptuous amusement. "Mitch gets a briefcase that looks like it was just pulled out of a dumpster." My mother, Dorothy, always striving to maintain appearances in public, patted my shoulder with strained politeness, feigning sympathy. Vernon was always an eccentric man with his antique trinkets, dear. Perhaps it holds some value for collectors. However, I clearly saw the relief in her eyes. She had received a lavish $3 million apartment in Miami, while her son, who actually visited Vernon every Sunday, inherited what appeared to be mere junk. The truth was, no one in our family expected Uncle Vernon to have any savings. For 40 years, he had owned a modest antique shop in downtown Baltimore, where dust was an integral part of the interior, and every surface was covered with someone's forgotten memories. He lived in a small 2-room apartment above the shop, drove his old 1992 Honda Civic until his death, and wore the same 3 suits in rotation to every family gathering. While my father built his thriving construction empire, and my brother Randall successfully flipped houses for huge profits, Vernon spent his weekends at estate sales, examining broken watches and tarnished silverware with the focus of a seasoned cardiac surgeon. Behind his back, family members often called him eccentric Vernon, and sometimes to his face, especially when Dwayne had too much wine at Christmas dinner. But I knew a different Vernon. An uncle who taught me to play chess when I was only 8, a man who showed me how to distinguish real silver from plated, how to determine the age of furniture by its joints and screws, and how to see value where others saw only useless junk. Every Sunday after church, while my family went to expensive restaurants for brunch, I would bring Vernon coffee and a sandwich from Gino's Deli. We would sit in his cluttered shop, and he would tell me fascinating stories about the objects surrounding us, stories hidden in the scratches and stains. 3 weeks before that fateful day at the lawyer's office, Vernon died of a heart attack. He was 71 and working alone in his shop on a Tuesday morning. A customer found him slumped over a table, a magnifying glass in his hand. He was carefully examining what at first glance appeared to be an ordinary, valueless pocket watch. Paramedics who arrived at the scene confirmed that he passed quickly and painlessly. At the funeral, family members offered half-hearted condolences. Randall complained that he had missed a showing of prestigious beachfront property because of it. Dwayne even managed to take a business call during the service. My mother cried, but I suspected it was more for appearances than genuine grief. She and Vernon had barely spoken for the past 5 years, ever since he refused to lend her money for renovations on her beach house. The day Mr. Harrison called to announce the will reading, everyone in the Holbrook family expected a modest sum from the late Vernon. It was assumed he might have left around $50,000, probably tied to antique inventory that no one would likely want. Randall, the narrator's brother, even joked that they might have to pay to have all that junk hauled away. However, Mr. Harrison stunned them with the news. Vernon Holbrook, the eccentric uncle known for his tape-repaired shoes, had left an inheritance of $22 million. The news hit like a bombshell. My mother couldn't suppress a scream, and Dwayne's face instantly changed as if he'd been struck by lightning. Randall, stunned, dropped his phone. In this chaos, while Mr. Harrison read out the distribution of the inheritance, each more generous than the last, the narrator, Mitchell, pondered how Vernon had managed to conceal his wealth from everyone. How could he have missed it? All those Sunday visits, all those conversations, and not a single hint. When Mr. Harrison uttered Mitchell's name and mentioned only a briefcase, a deafening silence fell in the room, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. All eyes turned to him, not with sympathy but with a kind of shocked amusement, as if he had become the culmination of Vernon's last joke. Uncle Vernon, it seemed, couldn't possibly be rich. In the family's eyes, he was an oddball who bought old junk at estate sales and lived in a cramped apartment above his dusty antique shop in downtown Baltimore. While Mitchell's father built his construction business from scratch and Randall made a fortune flipping real estate, Vernon spent his weekends at flea markets and garage sales, examining penny trinkets through a jeweler's loop as if they were precious gems. His shop was a true labyrinth of forgotten stories. Antique clocks, long since stopped ticking, lined the wall, and display cases held tarnished silver, chipped porcelain, and jewelry that had lost its luster half a century ago. The smell of old wood and furniture polish was so strong you could almost taste it. Most visitors, after a quick glance inside, would immediately leave, but Vernon seemed to care little for customers or sales. He was interested in the objects themselves. He would run his fingers over carved wood as if reading Braille, and hold crystal glasses up to the light to see patterns invisible to others. At the age of 8, Mitchell began visiting Uncle Vernon regularly. That year, his parents divorced, and Sunday visits to his uncle became a kind of refuge from the tension at home. Vernon taught him to play chess on an antique set that, he claimed, once belonged to a Confederate general. "History isn't in books, Mitchell," he would say, moving a carved ivory knight across the board. "It's in the things people leave behind. Every scratch tells a story. Every repair is evidence that someone cared enough about something to fix it, not throw it away." By the time Mitchell became a high school history teacher, visiting Vernon had become as routine as breathing. Every Sunday after church, he'd stop at Gino's Deli for Vernon's usual order: black coffee, no sugar, and a turkey sandwich with extra mustard. They'd sit in the shop, surrounded by stacks of auction catalogs, talking about everything and nothing. Vernon would show him his latest finds, usually bought for a pittance at estate sales where grieving families just wanted to get rid of the deceased's belongings. A music box that played a 1920s tune, a leather ledger from a Baltimore firm that went bankrupt during the Great Depression, a set of medical instruments from a WWI field hospital. All these items were imbued with history. "People think I'm crazy," he confessed once, polishing a brass compass with more care than most parents show their children. "Your mother certainly does. Randall thinks I'm wasting my life. But Mitchell, I'm the richest man I know, not in money, but in stories, in connections to people who lived before us." Within the family, Vernon was perceived more as an annoying obligation. Every year, at Christmas, he would appear at the doorstep in his old Honda Civic, invariably dressed in the same brown suit that seemed to have come straight from the 80s. The gifts he brought were wrapped in newspaper, as Vernon considered spending money on wrapping paper an unforgivable luxury. The gifts themselves were quite peculiar: a Victorian letter opener for the narrator's mother, who hadn't written a letter by hand in 20 years, an antique slide rule for Randall, accustomed to performing all calculations on his smartphone, and a rusty scout compass for cousin Dwayne, who managed to get lost even with a GPS. Dorothy, the narrator's mother and Vernon's younger sister, was particularly displeased by his visits. Since her youth, she had been ashamed of her humble origins, married the narrator's father for his ambition, and spent her life trying to forget her roots connected to a family of dock workers and seamstresses. Vernon was a living reminder of the past she desperately tried to escape. During family dinners, she would constantly interrupt his stories about historical artifacts, redirecting attention to her latest vacation or Randall's new acquisition. She would demonstratively roll her eyes when Vernon became enthusiastic about an old photograph whose authenticity he had managed to establish. In private conversations with her son, Dorothy didn't mince words. "Vernon never grew up," she would say. "He's 70, and he's still messing with old junk. Thank God you became a teacher, Mitchell. At least you have a real job with benefits and a pension." However, the truth was that Mitchell, teaching history to teenagers more interested in TikTok videos than the Civil War, earned only $48,000 a year. Combined with his wife Gloria's nurse salary, they barely made enough to pay the mortgage on their modest 3-bedroom house in Towson. Their son Patrick needed braces, and their daughter Bethany was already starting to look at colleges. Meanwhile, Randall drove a Mercedes and owned numerous rental properties across Maryland. Dwayne successfully sold luxury cars and lived in a house with a pool. Even Mitchell's mother, living off the proceeds from the sale of her late husband's construction business, could afford expensive cruises and cosmetic procedures. And yet, Vernon never seemed poor to Mitchell. He knew all the antique dealers from Baltimore to Philadelphia and could determine the age of a piece of furniture by the type of nails used. He spoke of artifacts as if they were old friends. When other dealers needed authentication or historical context, they turned to Vernon. Even the Baltimore Museum, when it needed an expert to assess the provenance of a donated collection, sought Vernon's help. He was respected in his field, even if that field held no significance for his family. That's why the news of $22 million came like a bolt from the blue. Vernon wore shoes until the soles fell off, ate the same sandwich every day, and hadn't renovated his shop or apartment in 30 years. Where did this money come from? And why had he hidden it from everyone, even Mitchell? There was no cash in the briefcase. Returning from the lawyer's office, Mitchell placed it on the kitchen table and immediately opened it, while his family crowded around, a mix of hope and skepticism on their faces. Inside, the briefcase looked even worse than outside. The leather dividers were warped from moisture, and black mold covered what might once have been a silk lining. A brittle stack of yellowed receipts from the 1940s crumbled to dust as soon as Mitchell touched them. The smell emanating from the briefcase made Gloria involuntarily recoil and open a window. "Maybe there's a secret compartment," Patrick suggested, carefully poking a pencil at the moldy fabric. Mitchell's 16-year-old son was trying to be helpful, but his face showed they were all thinking the same thing. It was just junk. Uncle Vernon had left Mitchell actual trash, while everyone else got millions. Bethany, Mitchell's 14-year-old daughter, was more direct in her judgment. "Dad, why would Uncle Vernon do this to you? You were the only one who truly loved him." Mitchell had no answer. That night, with Gloria and the children asleep, Mitchell sat alone in his garage, examining the ill-fated briefcase under the harsh fluorescent light. His phone vibrated incessantly with new messages. Randall had sent a photo of his $4 million stock portfolio documents with the caption, "Sorry about your bad luck, little bro." Dwayne posted on Facebook about his inherited vintage car collection, making sure to tag Mitchell. His mother called 3 times, each message steeped in fake concern about how Mitchell was coping with his disappointment. Worst of all, doubts began to creep into Mitchell's mind. Had he misunderstood his relationship with Vernon? Were all those Sunday visits just a manifestation of his naive foolishness, while Vernon secretly mocked his attention? A man he had seen only a couple of times in his life had left his great-niece $500,000 for college. And to Mitchell, he had left a briefcase that looked like it had been pulled from a junkyard, from the depths of oblivion. By Thursday, news of Vernon's unusual will had spread throughout the family. Aunt Lucille called, perplexed by the deceased's strange decision. Cousin Terence, who hadn't spoken in 3 years, suddenly expressed a desire to have lunch to catch up, but in reality, probably to gloat. Even Patrick's girlfriend asked if it was true that Mitchell was the only heir who hadn't received anything worthwhile. That Friday evening, Gloria found Mitchell in the garage again, a trash bag in his hands, ready to throw away the ill-fated briefcase. Resentment and humiliation tore at his soul. Every glance at the object reminded him of the snickers in the lawyer's office, the barely suppressed smirks, the relief in his mother's eyes that her son hadn't received real money. "Mitchell, wait," Gloria stopped him, snatching the bag from his hands. "This isn't like Vernon. Remember? He spent half a century studying antiques. He knew the value of every item he touched. Do you really think he didn't realize this briefcase was just junk?" "Maybe that was the point," Mitchell mumbled, slumping onto the workbench. "Maybe he was angry that I was the only one who visited him. Maybe it was his way of saying my visits meant nothing. Gloria took the briefcase, wrinkling her nose in disgust at the musty smell, but examining it carefully. The Vernon you've described for the past 12 years would never do something like this. The man who taught you history carefully preserved every detail, noticed what others missed. He always had a reason for everything. She was right. Mitchell knew it. Vernon once spent 3 hours explaining how the placement of a single screw could indicate the decade a piece of furniture was made. He wouldn't give junk away for no reason. And so Mitchell brought the briefcase back into the house to look at it anew, not as a disappointed heir, but as Vernon's student. The briefcase was American-made, evident from the style of the brass hardware. Even under the layers of dirt and damage, the leather felt high quality, handmade. Through the mold and decay inside, a manufacturer's stamp emerged. H. Kaufman & Sons, Philadelphia, 1943, wartime. Mitchell grabbed his laptop and started searching. It turned out the company specialized in manufacturing products for the military during World War II, including briefcases for intelligence officers. His heart began to pound. Vernon had taught him that military items often had secret compartments, especially intelligence equipment. He picked up the briefcase again, now under good light and with a fresh perspective. The fabric lining inside was heavily damaged by water and mold. But, running his fingers along the edges, Mitchell noticed what Vernon would have noticed immediately. Near the back panel, the lining was thicker. The seam was also different. The threads were newer, darker than the originals, hidden under a fold of fabric. Someone had modified this briefcase after its manufacture, and that someone had used a sewing technique Vernon had taught him years ago, a way to create an invisible seam that only one who was looking would find. His hands trembled as Mitchell picked up a kitchen knife. Gloria watched as he carefully cut the hidden seams, discovering exactly what he had hoped for, a secret compartment, and inside it, an envelope and something wrapped in oilcloth. His hands shook so violently that Gloria had to steady the briefcase. Behind the fabric lay a thin, skillfully crafted cavity, and within it, a time-yellowed envelope and something wrapped in oilcloth, solid and weighty to the touch. Inside the envelope was a letter, written in Vernon's shaky hand, the same neat handwriting Mitchell had seen on thousands of acquisition forms and certificates of authenticity. Gloria read over his shoulder as he held the paper under the lamp. "Mitchell, if you are reading this, you have found what everyone else would have thrown away." "Good. This briefcase belonged to Stanley Rohr, an intelligence officer during World War II. What you hold in your hands is the reason I was able to retire a millionaire and why I am giving you something more valuable than all the money left to others. The key opens a safe deposit box in a bank in Bern, Switzerland. The account number is in the journal. Mr. Harrison does not know about this because it was never part of my estate. It belonged to the briefcase, and now the briefcase belongs to you. Remember what I taught you. True treasure is never on the surface." My heart pounded furiously as my trembling fingers unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside was a small leather journal, passport-sized, and a brass key that, despite its venerable age, looked as if it had just been polished. On the first page of the journal, in clear official handwriting, a single line was inscribed, "Account 447891, Swiss National Bank, Bern." My mind raced, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Gloria, instantly assessing my state, grabbed my hand and, obeying her medical instinct, checked my pulse. "Mitchell, breathe evenly," she said, concerned. "You're hyperventilating." "It's a Swiss bank account from World War II, I whispered, barely catching my breath. "Vernon found it and didn't say a word to anyone." The journal contained numerous entries in Vernon's hand, detailing his research into the life of Stanley Rohr, an intelligence officer who served in Switzerland during the war and tragically died in a car accident in 1946. Rohr had no family or heirs, and in 1976 his estate was sold in Philadelphia, where Vernon acquired this briefcase for only $12. "We need to call the lawyer immediately," Gloria declared, already dialing. "This could be illegal. What if it's stolen money, Nazi gold, or something like that?" Her fears were well-founded. As a history teacher, I was well aware of the complex moral and legal reputation of Swiss banks from that era. However, Vernon's notes were surprisingly detailed. He had meticulously researched Stanley Rohr's biography, who it turned out served in a unit dedicated to returning stolen works of art to their rightful owners. His activities were thoroughly documented in military archives. He was one of the good guys. I dialed Mr. Harrison's number, calling him at home. It was almost midnight, but this couldn't wait. He answered after the third ring, his voice tinged with irritation that instantly vanished as soon as I explained the nature of the discovery. A Swiss account. His tone changed immediately. Mr. Holbrook never mentioned any foreign assets, he said, puzzled. It wasn't listed anywhere in his financial records. Can you verify if this account actually exists, and would it be legal for me to access it? Bring all the documents to my office first thing tomorrow morning, he instructed. And Mitchell, don't tell anyone about this yet, not even your family. Sleep eluded me that night. Gloria and I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, poring over Vernon's journal under the light of a desk lamp. He had spent 5 years meticulously researching Stanley Rohr's life, sifting through military records, interviewing surviving comrades, and even traveling to Switzerland in 1981 to verify the account's existence. However, he never used it until 1995, when he withdrew a small sum to purchase a building in Baltimore and begin investing in the stock market. He turned stolen Nazi gold into something legitimate, Gloria said, shaking her head in amazement. He used blood money to build an honest fortune. No, I countered, delving deeper into the reading. Look here. The payment to Rohr came from the Allied forces. It was payment for recovered artworks that were returned to their rightful owners. It was a legitimate military payment that simply got lost in the bureaucracy after Rohr's death. Vernon didn't steal anything. He found treasure in trash, as he always said. The next morning, I arrived at Harrison's office even before it opened. He spent 3 hours on international calls, while I, like a caged tiger, paced his waiting room. When he finally invited me in, his face was ashen. The account exists. It has been inactive since Vernon's withdrawal in 1995. The Swiss bank confirms that you have a legal right to access it as the owner of the physical key and account information. But Mitchell, you will have to travel to Switzerland in person. They will not discuss amounts over the phone, and the key must be presented in person. Is it legal? Can I access it without any problems? Switzerland now has transparency agreements with the U.S. You'll have to declare everything to the IRS, pay taxes. But yes, it's legal. Vernon was incredibly cunning. By hiding all of this in the briefcase and not mentioning it in his will, he made it part of the briefcase's contents, not part of the inheritance. Now, you own it freely and without any restrictions. 2 weeks later, Mitchell Holbrook found himself in the marble splendor of the Swiss National Bank lobby in Bern. This building, an embodiment of modernity and power, was the complete opposite of Vernon's antique shop. The flight to Switzerland cost Mitchell an unbearable $3,000, charged to a credit card teetering on its limit. Gloria had urged him to fly immediately, fearing that family intervention would complicate matters. Mr. Brenner, the account manager, fit the stereotype of a Swiss banker, impeccably suited, English with a subtle accent and an inscrutable expression. He meticulously examined the documents, cross-referencing signatures, checking the key's serial number against an old ledger, and making brief calls in German. This is highly unusual, he finally stated, setting down his gold-rimmed glasses. The account has been inactive for almost 80 years, with the exception of one withdrawal in 1995. Do you understand the gravity of the situation? We must be absolutely certain of your legal right to these funds. After 2 hours of painstaking verification, Mr. Brenner escorted Mitchell to a private room, furnished with dark wood panels and adorned with a portrait of an important dignitary looking down with disapproval. Left alone, Mitchell waited for a long 20 minutes that felt like an eternity. When the manager returned, he carried a metal box and a thick folder. Mr. Holbrook, the account contains bearer bonds and a safe deposit box. The bonds alone, with interest accumulated since 1945, are valued at approximately $14 million. Access to the safe deposit box requires the physical key. The sum of $14 million struck Mitchell like a physical blow. In 12 years of teaching, he had never managed to save more than $5. His hands trembled as he inserted Vernon's brass key into the safe deposit box lock. The mechanism turned smoothly, as if awaiting this moment. Inside the box lay stacks of documents, photographs, and another letter. It was written by Stanley Rohr himself in January 1946, a month before his death. The paper, perfectly preserved thanks to the climate-controlled Swiss vault, crackled in his hands. "To whomever finds this," Rohr's letter began, "these bonds are payment for the return of stolen artworks seized from Nazi collectors operating in Switzerland. The artworks were successfully returned to Jewish families in France and Poland. My handlers perished in the final days of the war before I could report the payment. Military intelligence was in chaos. No one knew of this account's existence. I planned to use it for intelligence operations after the war, but if you are reading this, I am dead. These funds have no owner. They now belong to history. Use them to make the world a better place." Below Rohr's letter was a note from Vernon, dated 1995, when he made the sole withdrawal. "Mitchell, I knew you would be the one to get this when you were 11 years old. You were the only one in our family who understood that value isn't always obvious. Your mother and brother are obsessed with money they can see. But you sat with me for hours, studying maker's marks and wood grain patterns, understanding that history can be worth more than gold. I used $2 million from the account to build my own fortune, investing carefully, living modestly, watching it grow. The rest I left to you, not because you are my family, but because you are a teacher. You shape minds. You ensure history is not forgotten. The family will soon know. Swiss banks report to U.S. authorities. What matters now is what you do next. Your brother will claim you owe him because he is family. Your mother will blame you because she's getting old. Dwayne will likely threaten to sue. Let them. The briefcase is legally yours, and everything in it belongs to you. I made sure of that. But here's what I truly want you to understand. I didn't give the others money and you a test. I gave them money because money is all they would understand from me. I gave you a choice. You could have thrown the briefcase away. Most people would have. But you looked deeper, as I taught you. That's why you deserve this." Mr. Brenner returned with a stack of papers requiring my signature, explaining at length the nuances of taxation and bank transfers, but I was far from his words. My thoughts were entirely absorbed by the image of Vernon, the Sundays spent in his shop where he, carefully lifting a tarnished silver object, would say, "Look closer, Mitchell. True treasure always reveals itself to those who know how to see." I thought of my relatives, already anticipating how they would spend their share of the inheritance. Randall, wasting no time, acquired another rental apartment. My mother booked a round-the-world cruise, and Dwayne boasted on social media with photos of his brand-new Lamborghini. They received from Vernon what they craved most, jingling coins that could be counted. But Vernon left me something much greater, a complex puzzle, the key to which only I possessed, a test that only I could pass. He put $14 million on the line, believing that I would not forget his lessons, that I would be able to discern, beyond the layer of mold and decay, the true value hidden within. The flight home seemed like an unreal dream. I constantly felt the pocket of my jacket, where the transfer documents lay, as if fearing they would disappear. The enormous sum, $14 million, was to be deposited into my account in the States after all taxes were paid. Even after tax deductions, I would have more money than all my relatives combined. Gloria met me at the airport, and I immediately shared the news with her. She abruptly pulled over to the shoulder of Route 695, trucks thundering past as we embraced, crying from overwhelming emotions. "Vernon knew exactly what he was doing," she said through tears, mascara streaking her cheeks. "He didn't just leave you money. He left you proof that you were the only one who truly understood him." The family gathering the following week was unusually tense. I invited everyone to my home, my modest 3-bedroom house that Randall had often ridiculed for its outdated kitchen cabinets and cramped garage. My mother arrived first, sparkling with new jewelry acquired with her inheritance money. Randall followed with his new girlfriend, a young real estate agent old enough to be his daughter. Dwayne arrived in his Lamborghini, revving the engine twice dramatically before shutting it off. They were all convinced I was going to ask them for money. Randall even began his prepared speech before I could utter a word. "Mitch, we can't contest the will. Vernon himself chose to leave you that briefcase. But if you run into any trouble, I'm willing to help you with investments." "You're right," I replied, standing in my living room where the ill-fated briefcase lay casually on the coffee table. It was Vernon's choice, and that briefcase contained information about an inactive Swiss bank account holding $14 million after taxes. The ensuing silence was deafening. Dwayne's smug expression, instantly vanished. My mother's mouth opened and closed without a sound. Randall's girlfriend skeptically asked if I was joking. When I presented them with the bank documents, Randall had to sink into a chair. "But here's what Uncle Vernon taught me," I continued. He said, "People throw away treasures because they don't see beyond the surface." Each of you saw this briefcase and mocked me. You thought Vernon was an eccentric old man collecting junk, but Vernon saw that I visited him every Sunday not for money but for companionship, and he left me not only wealth but also a valuable lesson on how to see value where others see nothing. My mother tried to object, her voice trembling. "Mitchell, but family is sacred. I'm your mother. Vernon was my brother." "Family was so important to Vernon that he left you $3 million, I countered. "That's more than most people earn in a lifetime. Be grateful for what you have." Dwayne threatened to contest the will, but Mr. Harrison, whom I had specifically invited for this purpose, clarified that the Swiss account had never been part of the estate. It was the contents of the briefcase, like finding cash in a gifted wallet, perfectly legal and entirely mine. But I wasn't finished. "I'm allocating $2 million for Bethany and Patrick's education and future. Gloria and I will use $1 million to pay off the mortgage on this house, and perhaps for the first time in our lives, go somewhere other than Ocean City. The remaining funds will go towards establishing the Vernon Holbrook Vocational Scholarship Fund. Children aspiring to learn trades like antique restoration, woodworking, historical preservation, and other skills Vernon valued will receive full scholarships." "You're giving it away?" Randall was utterly astonished. "You're giving away $11 million? "I'm investing it in what Vernon believed in preserving the past, in teaching important skills, in helping children learn to see value in things others overlook. The first scholarship is already earmarked for Jerome Washington, a kid from Vernon's old neighborhood who dreams of becoming a museum curator but can't even afford community college." They left one by one, Dwayne revving his engine demonstratively, Randall muttering something about foolish decisions. My mother was now crying real tears, but not for Vernon. Only Bethany remained, my smart daughter, who had inherited Vernon's attention to detail. "Dad," she said, reverently picking up the moldy briefcase, "Uncle Vernon didn't test you. He honored you. He knew you were the only one who would look deeper." 6 months later, at the first scholarship award ceremony for the newly established fund, I shared the story of the old briefcase with the assembled students, faculty, and sponsors. I brought the very briefcase, still bearing traces of mold and far from perfect, and placed it on the podium. Vernon Holbrook opened my eyes to the fact that history lives in objects, in the things people leave behind, I declared. This briefcase almost ended up in a landfill, like useless junk. But how many treasures do we discard without looking deeper? How many wonderful people do we overlook, deceived by their outward appearance? Vernon knew how to see value in everything and everyone. That is his true legacy. Now, that briefcase holds a place of honor in my home office, in a climate-controlled display case whose cost exceeds that of my first car. Friends of the late Patrick often wonder why such an unassuming item is kept in such a luxurious case. In response, they hear Vernon's words, "True treasure is never on the surface. You just have to learn to look deeper." Every Sunday, I visit Vernon's grave, bringing fresh flowers and aromatic coffee from Gino's Deli. I tell my teacher about the new scholars, their ambitious plans, the future antique shops and museums they will open, and the historical treasures they will help preserve for future generations. And sometimes, I imagine I hear Vernon's quiet voice. "Well done, Mitchell. You've finally learned the most important lesson. A true inheritance is not money, but something much more." Patrick's family maintains little contact with me, limiting themselves to formal Christmas greetings. But I accept this as it is. Vernon taught me that outward appeal does not always indicate genuine value, and conversely, what seems insignificant and worthless can turn out to be the greatest treasure one can find in life.